Hey now. Am I there?
All right, thanks for coming, everybody. We're gonna do a little pre-show here, a quick audio-visual presentation before the musical segment tonight. My name is Jason, and I am of this land and these waters. It's been a long time, but I'm happy to be back with a lot of old and new friends. I'm here because I just put out a journal recently called Barbarous Tongues, a journal of arts and esoterica. And one of the people that contributed to this that I interviewed is the man on the screen here, Tom Banger.
Hello, St. Louis.
Tom is a writer, an artist, a thinker, and an occulturist. He is a founding member of the Temple of Psychic Youth's North American station back in the mid-80s, and a friend and collaborator with the late Topi founder and cultural engineer Genesis Breyer p-orridge. And I'm very pleased that we were able to tune him in tonight. So Tom and I talked for about 3.5 hours about a year ago, and I condensed it as well as I could into this interview here. So we just wanted to kind of replay live a couple of the snippets. I think I heard some yips and cheers when I mentioned Genesis, Tom. So maybe we could start with that. And we're going to talk maybe for about 10 minutes, I think, and then there will be music following. But could you share maybe with us a little bit about how you met Genesis and how you got involved with the temple, and maybe whether that's through an anecdote or just some random thoughts?
Yes. So I was a underground promoter. I put on punk shows and other alternative stuff back in the mid to late 80s. Well, I guess actually in the mid 80s. Some of the things that I promoted and Flipper and the Misfits when they still had Danzig, and various of the SST bands, Husker Du, stuff like that. The most famous show I did was Einstürzen and Neubauten in a junkyard that made People magazine. Anyway, at some point, the manager for DOA, the Canadian band, was a guy named Ken Lester, and he started getting into managing a couple bands. He managed the Dead Kennedys and he managed DOA, and for some reason, he called me up one day and booked a DOA show with me, and then said, I have this other band. There's a very strange band. They're called Psychick Television. And I said, oh, Psychic TV? Yeah, I know that band really well. I'd been following them since they had started, since the breakup of Throbbing Gristle. So anyway, they asked to get in Denver, and there was no possible way. Denver could not, there was no way in 1986 that Denver as a market, air quotes, was going to be able to pay for a show at the scale of Psychic TV at that time. And almost nobody had heard of them. I don't think they even had a US release at that time. If they did, it was on cassette. And they had a really serious audio requirements. They needed a harmonizer, which was an impossible thing to get in Colorado in 1986, and they needed a stack of video projectors, which I happened to have, actually. Well, they didn't have video projectors back then. It was still TV sets and 16 millimeter film projectors and slide projectors. And I'd been running a video art gallery too, and so I actually had a 16 millimeter projector and a big stack of TVs. So I said, hey, there's just no way that we can do this show here. It would cost, we'd have to charge people at least $50 a head to get in, and there aren't enough people to pay $50 a head. You just did the math, 800 people at $5 a head, or 400 people at $10 a head, or 50 people at $100 a head, maybe. But there weren't 50 people that were going to pay $100 a head, so it's just impossible. So I said, but I'd really like to be part of this tour because I'd like to meet Genesis, because I'm really into the occult and I'm into industrial music, and I really respect that work and would like to, make this happen if we can. How about if you hire me to bring the back line so that you can charge the promoters more money because they'd save money. I could bring the video back line, the audio visual stuff, the projectors and stuff like that, and I could run them. They said, okay. So there I was on the Psychic TV tour. So we went on the Psychic TV tour. I went with another person who's been sort of written out of the history for pretty serious reasons. So I'm not going to mention him, but he was very much a part of the story. He just did some bad things to some people, and we don't talk about him anymore. Sorry to say. But anyway, we did the tour and drove around the country and did the thing. And like, of course, I mean, we were stagehands, and they were the band, and we were these random people from the States. So we really didn't mingle much during the tour. But then at the end, we went to Niagara Falls in New York and went to the amusement park and had a blast with Janess and Caress, who were then very small children, and Genesis and Paula and myself. And we wound up talking a little bit about the thing that sunk in the most, really, was that Genesis said that, going to an amusement park is not the opposite of intelligence. And having fun and being silly and being ridiculous and having a sense of levity isn't the opposite of intelligence. And I've carried that with me my whole career since then. My entire life. It was great advice. But then I said, you're doing this thing all wrong. If you want to make it in the US, you're going to have to get a bulk mailing permit and a post office box. And back then, if you wanted to hear from them, you had to send this little ticket called an international response coupon, which was this little sheet. You can still buy them, but you buy this little sheet and for a certain amount of money, and that's minimal postage for somebody to send you a letter back. And it's the equivalent of an international forever stamp. It's like a certificate. And nobody knew how to get those. And like, if you wanted to buy something, you had to buy an international money order, and that was like a big hassle, and conversion rates and stuff. So I said, you can't do that. Like, Americans don't understand that. We don't know how to do international things, and we still don't, do we? But we so I was just like, you need to do this in the US or it's not going to work. And so Genesis said, okay, well, why don't you do it? So I did. I applied for a bulk mailing permit. They sent me this stack of papers, like a big stack of papers that had 4 addresses on each sheet. And you were supposed to photocopy them and then glue, like, I guess, photocopy them and then cut them out and then glue them onto an envelope and send a newsletter out or something. I was like, no, we're not doing that. So somebody gave me a computer, and I learned how to run a database, and I entered all those things into the database and printed up labels and then sorted them, because you had to sort them and stack them and everything. And we sent out mailers, and they looked something like, might have a couple right here, maybe.
And just to lead in maybe to the next question while you're looking at that, would you say
it's
that
not going to cooperate? Let's go to the next question. But so I sent a mailer out, and people started asking for info, and I started sending it to them, and then they started sending stuff back, and we started making things out of it. Like, if somebody would send something about something, they'd do some research on something, or they send a clipping about something, or they'd write a little essay about something, and we'd photocopy it and send it back out to people. And that's kind of how it worked.
Was that the birth then of the Temple of Psychic Youth North America, would you say?
Yes, that's what we did, essentially. And then, I mean, there was the whole, like, actual Topi thing too, which we can talk about if
Yeah,
anybody's interest.
interest of time, because we're probably about halfway through our session at this point. Could you talk maybe a little bit then about how the mailings and the kind of dispersed reality of the temple would come together sometimes in Denver or around Denver for some live gatherings?
Not really. No. I mean, we did a camp out once a year.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so people would converge on Colorado, and we do a camp out where 10 to 20 people would get together, and we'd talk and meet and do trance work and dance and have drum circles and do rituals in our so-called initiation that we talk about in the Fenris Wolf, volume 11, I believe.
Excellent.
Um, but something I want to tell St. Louis people was we actually had a kind of special moment in St. Louis on the 88 tour, I believe. Or it might have been it was the 1990 tour. I think we played in St. Louis then. It was a messy show. We played the night after a
Folks might
band,
be
a
interested in
famous
the
band. We played the night after, and we were on the guest list, and we got all their drink tickets, and it was pretty ugly. But the night before the show, or the day before the show, we went to Cahokia, and which is just an incredible place. And Genesis and I went up to the top of it, and he he then, was identified as a male, so I refer to him as a he in this case, to them as a he. And but they took us. We went up to the top of Cahokia, and Jen was super impressed just that there were so many people there at that time, and how it's not part of the history and not part of the memory, and the whole Mississippi thing, and it's still kind of humbling to think of how many people have inhabited this land that are forgotten, and how many cities there have been that have been forgotten, and how many trade routes and communications and networks were formed. And in a way, you know, PTV and the Temple of Psychic Youth in general are kind of part of that, one of the layers in that cultural archaeology. You know, how, cultures form layers, and you dig through them, and we've become one of those layers that's an influence, and hopefully that other stuff, the work that you are doing now, is building on that foundation that we're part of. And I'm really proud to have been part of that, and love St. Louis. Like, that city museum place that has the Indian thing, and the Museum of Mental Health, and they have a really tight Native American collection and a weird doll collection, and it's a lovely museum if you haven't been there.
Awesome, thank you. Moving from that, then the idea of strata of history and culture. Maybe you could talk then a little more broadly about your ideas about collage and the cut-up format, and also then maybe segue into the culture conference that you're going to be a part of, and kind of your present and future selves.
Closing that door, it's noisy. Yes. So I've kind of made up this thing
You're
called
silent.
aporomancy, and that's
Yes.
I'll talk about aporomancy first, which is a word I made up from, I think, aporos. It's a Greek word for trash, and it's basically, I don't know. It kind of just started out that I'd see something cool on the street and I'd pick it up and save it, and then I started trying to find, sort of using it as a form of divination or as an oracle of, like, this thing that I found. What does it mean right now? Is it like finding a tarot card or a rune or something? And I sort of found that it was, and that it would sort of set a tone for a moment and give me a thought and then by putting it with other things, it would sort of accumulate power and create this kind of a connection, like, flipping over multiple tarot cards or something. And now you've got an earring with a little purple stone on it. And then you've got, like, I don't know, a gibbet that fell off of somebody's shoe that has a picture of Wednesday on it, Wednesday Adams, and then you just start finding these random things and kind of putting them together and wondering what they mean, and you can kind of shake them up and then see what order they come up as a cut up. And so you're getting into a three-dimensional cut up, and I've got there's a bunch of different ways that cut-ups can work, and I just happen to have a couple of little pieces of paper here, and we could, take something, and this one's every moment tells a story, cause a stir, growth begets change. And that's my spell for you, the attendees of this event. So every moment tells a story, cause a stir, because growth begets change, and that'll be your little blessing from me for this day, for this moment. And I so that's one thing, is you just kind of pull things up and you create order out of them. And there's a bunch of different ways that cut-ups can work. You can cherry pick phrases like I did here out of newspapers and magazines, or you can cut things into quarters or something like that, and then put things together and invent whole new words. Or you could take paragraphs and you could change the order of them. Or you can do words like Brian Geisen did and do permutation poems, where you do something like I am that I am that I, and just move the words around in all the different possible permutations and create new meaning out of each of those mixes of words. And all of those are different things, and you can preserve various levels of sense and order and context to it, or you can completely rub out the word by, cutting a whole text into pieces down the middle and reordering it and creating whole new language syntax context out of it. And so to me, it really becomes almost this Zen practice where you're putting yourself in the moment. When you start doing 3D cut-ups and, random things that you find, then you start really observing the environment outside of the context, right? So you see a feather on the ground, or you see an earring on the ground, or you see a piece of paper with text on it on the ground, and it becomes something that you can either disassociate from that context, you can put it into your context, you can put it into the context of the place, you can turn it into a spell for that moment, like an invocation or a sigil for that second, and or use it as a form of divination. And so there's all these different ways that you can apply it. But what I've found the most interesting is using it as a way to pull myself into the moment and out of the context and out of the context that I'm creating for myself through language by naming things. And in a way, a cut-up is a way of breaking up language and unnaming things, taking them out of their context, and so that you can form new connections and new contexts and new language to describe what you're feeling now, and as a bridge to how you want to feel later, or maybe to how you felt before in the past, and bridging that and trying to break up time in a way that is not linear in a Western sense of the way that we conceptualize time.
Amazing, amazing.
So I want to talk about texture, which is really fun. I've been doing a lot of rubbings, is taking mostly text, but also patterns, and rubbing the patterns, like taking an old crayon and rubbing across, embossed letters, or, a drain in a bathroom or something, and getting texture, or a screen, and getting texture off of it and creating grids and patterns and things like that. And what I've found, like the most interesting thing about it, I mean, it makes cool art and creates this fun texture, but it also makes me start thinking about texture, and I find myself touching things all the time that I never did before, like a blind person almost. And it engages an entirely different sense that's a very intense sense, I mean, feeling is a very memorable sense, almost like scent. Or, we don't remember what we hear that much, but we remember things that we smell and we taste, and touch is tactile and very much like that too. And so I find it really interesting to bring myself into a moment by touching things. Not people, not one of those.
On that note, I think we probably should start winding down because there's, I think, about 15 musicians to play over the next couple hours.
Awesome.
Could you
Kick ass, you guys and gals.
this year, I think, at the Culture Festival, and you'll be releasing a video pretty soon that's related to that. Is that right?
I'm going to be doing a little teaser for the occulture thing within the next week. Yes. And so thank you for listening to my drivel, everybody. And I hope that in some way I've been able to touch you. And remember, I'm going to break this up now. I'm going to cut these up real quick. So begets change, cause growth, a stir every moment tells a story. And one last one would be sweet symbols. So thank you. I'm grateful and thankful for you being here. And I hope that I've had some kind of impact on you this
Beautiful.
moment. Thank you for being here.
Yes, all my love to you and yours, and you and I will talk soon.
All right. Inshallah. Take care. Thank you for having me.